The cemetery was the kind of place most people avoided. Perched on the far edge of town, it was hemmed in by leaning iron gates and ancient oak trees whose branches tangled together like bony fingers overhead. Emma had never been afraid of it. In fact, she preferred walking there after long days at the bookstore where she worked. The quiet, the way the air seemed heavier as though the dead still breathed beneath the soil, it brought her a strange sort of comfort. Her life was a small, routine thing. She woke, she worked. She returned to her rented apartment that overlooked the gray stretch of highway, and she repeated the cycle. Friends had drifted away. Her family, fractured by years of silence, existed only as names in old photo albums. The graveyard, with its forgotten stones and crumbling statues, became her confidant. She wandered there as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of lavender and gold. Her boots crunched on the gravel path, and the familiar creak of the old gate closed behind her. Usually she traced the same loop, stopping by the angel statue at the center where pigeons roosted and ivy coiled around its stone robe. But that evening her gaze snagged on something different. In the farthest corner, beyond where even the groundskeeper rarely trimmed the weeds, there was color. Emma slowed, her breath hitching as she noticed it. A bouquet. Fresh, lush lilies, their white petals glowing almost unnaturally against the dark soil and the tired gray headstone they leaned upon. For a moment she thought her eyes were deceiving her. Flowers in this part of the cemetery were rare. Most of the graves here had been abandoned for decades, their families gone or disinterested. She stepped closer, her curiosity gnawing at her caution. The gravestone itself was modest, tilted slightly to one side as though the earth beneath had shifted. The carved letters were eroded, the name barely legible. She crouched, brushing moss away with trembling fingers until faint outlines appeared. Elena Rose Whitfield. Born 1923, died 1947. Emma's brow furrowed. She had walked this cemetery 100 times and never noticed Elena's grave before. The headstone bore no flowers, no tokens of love, until now. She reached toward the lilies. Their stems were damp as though placed only hours earlier. A ribbon of pale satin tied them together, fluttering gently in the evening breeze. Something glinted at the base, half tucked beneath the bouquet. It was a note. Emma's heart knocked against her ribs. Her fingertips tingled as she carefully unfolded the small, cream-colored paper. The handwriting inside was elegant, curling letters that seemed both old-fashioned and deliberate. She read the words once, then again, her breath quickening with each pass. For Elena, I never stopped loving you, not even after the truth was buried. Forgive me. A friend. Emma froze, her vision tunneled. A cold shiver traveled down her spine, so sharp it made her sway. Who had left this? Who still remembered Elena after nearly 80 years? And more hauntingly, what truth had been buried? The air around her seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on her chest. She glanced around the empty cemetery, half expecting to see a shadowy figure retreating behind the trees. But there was only silence, broken by the distant caw of a crow. She read the note again, the words searing into her mind. Forgive me. Her legs trembled as she sank onto the grass beside the grave. She didn't know this Elena, didn't know her story, yet something about the message felt personal, as if it had been meant for her eyes, as if the grave itself had been waiting for someone to notice. Emma closed her eyes and tried to breathe steadily, but images flashed through her mind, unbidden. A young woman in a faded dress standing by a river, a voice crying out in desperation, a secret carried to the grave. She didn't know where these visions came from, her imagination, she told herself. Still, her heart pounded like a drum. The note slipped from her fingers and fluttered onto the grass. She pressed her palms to her face, trying to steady herself, but the world tilted. The cemetery spun in a dizzy haze. Her chest tightened, as though invisible hands squeezed her lungs. And then, with a low gasp, Emma collapsed beside Elena's forgotten grave. The world returned in fragments, sound first, then light. Emma stirred on the cold earth, her cheek pressed against damp grass. The faint rustle of leaves above whispered her back to consciousness. For a disoriented moment she thought she was home, waking from an uneasy dream, but then her gaze caught the cracked gravestone in front of her. Elena Rose Whitfield. The memory of the note surged back and Emma's chest clenched. She sat up slowly, her hands trembling as she reached for the paper. It was still there, caught against the stone, its edges fluttering in the faint evening wind. She folded it carefully, slipping it into her coat pocket as though it were evidence of something too important to leave behind. She should have left then, but she couldn't tear herself away. Her eyes traced Eleanor's name again and again. Who had loved her enough to return after so many decades? And what truth was so heavy that even the grave could not contain it? The sky had deepened into twilight, shadows stretching long across the cemetery. Emma rose unsteadily, brushing the dirt from her palms, and forced herself to walk home. Yet all night the words of the note burned in her mind. Sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that name, Eleanor. By morning, Emma had made up her mind. She needed to know more. Her first stop was the town's library, a squat brick building she'd visited countless times before. The archivist, Mrs. Caldwell, was a gray-haired woman with an air of quiet suspicion toward anyone who asked too many questions. Emma approached her desk with careful words. "I'm looking for information on someone who lived here a long time ago. Eleanor Rose Whitfield, born 1923, died 1947. Mrs. Caldwell adjusted her glasses and studied Emma for a moment before nodding. "That's a name I haven't heard in many years," she murmured, as though tasting something long forgotten. "Wait here." Minutes later, the woman returned with two heavy binders, old newspaper clippings preserved in fragile plastic sleeves. Emma carried them to a table in the corner, her pulse quickening. The first clipping was a simple obituary, dated July 1947. Eleanor R. Whitfield, age 24, passed unexpectedly. Beloved daughter of Margaret and John Whitfield. Service held at St. Mary's, burial in Willow Grove Cemetery. Unexpectedly, the word hung in Emma's mind like a shadow. Further pages revealed more. A headline from July 12, 1947. Local woman DROWNS in river. Miss Eleanor Whitfield, a young woman of fine character, tragically drowned last week in the River Holloway. Authorities have ruled the death accidental. Witnesses reported she had been seen near the riverbank the evening prior, though no one was present at the time of the incident. She is survived by her parents. Miss Whitfield was engaged to Mr. Charles Bennett, a prominent businessman's son. Emma's breath caught. A drowning, an engagement, an accident that didn't feel like one. She flipped through more clippings, her hands shaking. One article mentioned Charles Bennett by name, describing him as distraught at the loss of his fiancée. Another article, tucked away at the bottom of a page weeks later, was less flattering. Charles Bennett town. In the wake of Miss Whitfield's untimely passing, Mr. Bennett has left for the city. Rumors persist of discord between the families, though both parties have declined comment. Emma leaned back, her pulse racing. A drowning that seemed suspicious, a fiancé who left abruptly, and a note, decades later, pleading for forgiveness. Could the stranger who left the flowers be Charles? Impossible, she thought. He would be over 90 by now, if even alive. But maybe someone connected to him. She copied the clippings, folded them into her bag, and left the library with more questions than answers. That evening, Emma returned to the cemetery, drawn by an invisible string. She half expected another bouquet, another note, but the grave lay undisturbed, the lilies wilting softly in the autumn air. She knelt, brushing her fingers over Eleanor's name. "I don't know who you were," she whispered, her voice cracking, "but I'm going to find out." As if in response, a chill wind swept across the grass, rustling the trees. Days turned into weeks. Emma dug deeper, scouring town records, church archives, even speaking with elderly residents who still remembered fragments of the Whitfield name. Slowly, a picture emerged. Alina was described as beautiful, spirited, and fiercely independent. Her parents had disapproved of her engagement to Charles Bennet, seeing him as ambitious and controlling. There were whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, that Alina had wanted to call off the wedding. One elderly woman, Mrs. Hargrove, who had been a child at the time, leaned close to Emma as she recalled. They said she was carrying his child. That's why the wedding was rushed. But then she was gone, drowned, and everyone stopped talking about it. Too scandalous for the time. Emma's stomach knotted. If Alina had been pregnant and if Charles had a temper. The note resurfaced in her thoughts. I never stopped loving you, not even after the truth was buried. What truth? That her death wasn't an accident, that she had been silenced. One night, unable to sleep, Emma spread all the documents across her kitchen table, the clippings, her notes, the fragile letter she'd found at the grave. She stared at the handwriting, the delicate curves of each letter. She traced them with her fingertip, imagining an elderly hand placing it down just days ago. Someone out there knew more. Someone still alive carried the weight of this secret. The answer came sooner than she expected. A week later, as Emma approached the cemetery once more, she saw him. A man in a long coat standing with his back to her, shoulders stooped with age. In his hands, another bouquet of lilies. Her heart pounded. She froze, torn between fear and the need to know. The man knelt, set the flowers down, and bowed his head. Then slowly he straightened and turned. His face was deeply lined, his hair thin and white, but his eyes, sharp gray and full of sorrow, locked onto hers. For a long moment they only stared at each other. Then he spoke, his voice rasping with age. "You found the note." Emma's breath caught. "It was you." He nodded. "I never thought anyone would see it. I come here at dusk, always alone, always with lilies. She loved them." "Who are you?" Emma whispered. His gaze drifted back to the gravestone. "My name doesn't matter. Once long ago I was Charles Bennet." The name hit her like a stone. She stepped closer, the questions tumbling out. "You loved her, but why write that? What truth?" Charles's shoulders sagged under invisible weight. His voice broke. "Because I failed her. Alina didn't drown. She was trying to leave me. She didn't want the marriage. That night by the river we argued. I begged her to stay. I grabbed her arm when she tried to walk away and she slipped. The current was strong and she was gone before I could save her." Emma's throat tightened. "You killed her." "I never meant to," he whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. "But it was my fault all the same. Her parents despised me already. The police believed it was an accident and I let them. I let the world bury her as though nothing more had happened. And I carried the truth alone, year after year, until it rotted inside me." Emma's chest heaved. She didn't know whether to pity him or scream. The note, the lilies, the decades of silence, it all crashed together in her mind. Charles reached out, his hand trembling. "You were not meant to know, but perhaps Alina led you here. Perhaps she wanted someone to finally hear." Emma stared at him, her vision blurring with tears. She looked at the grave, at the wilted flowers that seemed to whisper of lives cut short. And then, with a sob that tore through her chest, she collapsed again, this time not from shock, but from the unbearable weight of a story too heavy for her heart to carry. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Charles's broken voice, repeating Alina's name into the cold night air.